Hi everybody, welcome to Top Tips. Today it's regulators, so let's dive straight in. Most regulators today are downstream, so should anything break, it's actually designed to break in the open position and deliver more gas than none at all. There are some upstream regulators, but they're pretty rare nowadays. Most are downstream today. Inside of a second stage is a flexible membrane called a diaphragm, which sits on the front of your regulator underneath the purge button. As you inhale, you suck that diaphragm in, which pushes on a little lever that opens up a valve that lets gas in from the hose. Air then rushes in, and when you stop breathing, that increase in air that's rushing in and a spring underneath the lever pushes the diaphragm forwards, which shuts the valve. Pushing the purge button has the exact same effect because you're manually pushing the diaphragm back. When you exhale, you're pushing the diaphragm forwards, but the air actually escapes through a one-way mushroom valve at the bottom of your second stage, which also pushes any water out of the bottom. Free flows are an unfortunate effect of how second stages work. As the gas rushes into a second stage, it's usually directed into your mouth. That's where you want it, but the rush of air basically creates a vacuum that draws the diaphragm back. This is the Venturi effect. The Venturi effect doesn't matter so much when it's in your mouth, but your octo out of your mouth and the gas rushing out of it, which opens up the valve even more, which lets more gas through, and it just gets worse and worse. Stopping free flows is easy early on. Just block the mouthpiece with your finger. Holding the outlet closed causes the pressure to build up on the inside, which pushes that diaphragm out and shuts the valve. Mouthpiece facing downwards is also important. If you hold a second stage mouthpiece up and then lower it into the water, after about an inch or so, it will start to deliver gas. So when jumping in, try and keep all of the mouthpieces on your second stages down, especially around the surface. A lot of regulators have a switch or a lever on the second stage that helps prevent a free flow, often called a Venturi lever. It usually controls a small collar or a vane on the inside of the second stage, which actually redirects the airflow towards the front of the second stage instead of your mouth, effectively pushing the diaphragm forwards to help close the valve. You can still breathe this way with the Venturi switch in the forward position, but the work of breathing has increased a little bit. A lot of second stages today also have a breathing adjustment control. The valve is held closed by a spring. When you inhale, that spring is pulled back to let some gas out, but when you stop inhaling, the spring then closes the valve again. The breathing adjustment, when you screw it in, actually pushes that spring in, making it a little bit harder to inhale. And when you screw it all the way out, it relieves a bit of the tension on that spring, so it's easier to open the valve when you inhale. Opening the valve on your tank should be done as slowly as possible. A sudden rush of high pressure can actually shock parts of your regulator, extruding O-rings, locking pins. So the best method is to hold the purge button down on one of your second stages, slowly open the tank valve until you can hear that hiss, and then let go of the purge button, and your regulators should charge up. When you can, then you can open up that valve all the way open. Never breathe from a second stage upside down. Because the exhaust tee is now at the highest point when it's upside down, any water inside of the second stage won't be purged. But worse, when you inhale, that rush of air will actually push the water into your mouth and you'll get a mouthful of water. So even in an emergency, take an extra half second to turn it the right way round, with the mouthpiece at the highest point. That way you know that the regulator is the right way up. It's not unusual for a new regulator to creep a little bit after the first few dives. All of the moving parts, just after repetitive breathing cycles, they start to ease and settle into place. But because regulators are downstream, it can often mean that a little gas creeps through when you're not inhaling after the first dive. Most dive centers, if you brought the regulators there, they're quite happy to just tweak them for you. It's usually pretty easy. Just don't buy a new regulator and then go straight on a 2-week dive trip. It's best to actually test them out first to make sure that they settle in properly. A similar problem happens when regulators get a bit old and need a service. The seal is basically a flat plastic disc, and the valve seals against that. With the spring kind of pushing them together, the soft seal often beds in and the valve actually leaves a mark. When the valve goes a little bit too deep or the seal is a little bit too stiff, gas can actually leak through and then start to creep. If you keep getting water inside of your second stage, there are a couple of common reasons for that. The first one is being a hole in your mouthpiece. A small tear will actually be quite hard to notice, so gently pull on the mouthpiece to check for any holes in it. The exhaust valve is another common one. They sometimes grit can actually get caught underneath the valve holding it open, so just flush them out with some warm soapy water. You might also have a hole in the diaphragm. It's pretty rare, but it's not unheard of. You basically need the diaphragm replaced by a technician. Regulators need to be serviced. O-rings inside them harden, they split, they flatten as well, and they basically don't do their job anymore over time. Greases as well, they start to dry up, so it's best to get them serviced often. Most regulators need to be serviced once a year or after 100 dives, but double check the manual for your regulators, because some can even go up to 3 years or 300 dives. If you leave your regulators in storage for 6 months or longer, they will need servicing. And if you use them a lot, the other end of the spectrum, they're going to need servicing more often as well. Check the manual or the website when you're buying your regulators, because as I said earlier, some have 2 years and even 3-year service schedules, and check your regulators for a storage function as well. Some regulators actually have a special feature inside them that can help them survive a long storage period. Hose protectors, those little rubber things at the end of each of the hose, they're a double-edged sword. They're great to prevent the hose from bedding and damaging that end of the hose itself by pulling the hose off the ferrule, but they do hold water against the hose and they hide rot underneath, so you don't notice it until you actually pull them back. Covering the metal part of the hose can also affect the cold water performance of the regulator. Not very much, but still by a little. There is no universal mouthpiece size, so when you're buying replacement mouthpieces, make sure that it will fit your specific regulator. There are about 3 standard sizes, so try and take care when you're buying replacements and stick to the same brand if you can. You should be pretty safe that way. The small round things on your first stage are called port plugs, and as the name suggests, they plug unused ports where a hose could be fitted. Keep them. They are very useful and they have spare O-rings on them as well that you can reuse for your hoses. If you're buying a first stage by itself, it will always have 1 port plug missing so that you can't pressurize the first stage and then never get it off the tank again. Okay, so that was top tips. If you have any top tips that you've come across in your diving career, let us know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.